Hello and welcome to another Thanatoys making of video. No normal intro this time, I'm afraid. I just got caught out in the rain and I'm soggy as hell, so just imagine this face is speaking to you. Okay, that's quite enough of that. As much as I love working on the Crit dolls, I sometimes get a little burnt out, so this week I decided to work on some more porcelain style dolls. In a similar fashion to the aforementioned fluffy abominations, I take an old discarded porcelain doll and revamp it using 3D printed components. First things first, we need to remove the doll's attire. Unfortunately, this doll has some pretty irritatingly complicated clothing, especially to put back together, but I digress. Once we've removed the clothing, we can really see the porcelain parts that we'll be working with. Often with these porcelain dolls, they'll be wearing socks and shoes, so you don't necessarily have to paint the feet. However, this one is barefoot, so go figure. Now that we've taken the doll apart and have a good idea of its measurements, we can work on the actual head. This time, the head that I'm using is actually an adaptation of a previous model I made as part of an art competition. As you can see, it was originally a full, creepy monster. However, I took the 3D file and modified it significantly to make her a little more, let's say, demure, and a little bit less bald. With the model complete, I send it off to my printer, and after some cleaning and support removal and a post-cure, oh, and of course a bit of sanding, well, they're ready to paint. My favourite way to prime 3D printed resin is with some black Molotow acrylic paint, airbrushed in thin layers over the model. This was kind of where I started to realise I hadn't made life easy for myself with the hair sculpt. There are a lot of gaps that are, even with an airbrush, are super hard to get to, but we persevere, and with some delicate aiming I was able to get the whole thing coated. Of course, we can't forget to prime the porcelain parts too, as they need to match the face. I should probably also mention that before this I soaked a microfiber cloth in isopropyl alcohol and just went over the surface to make sure that any residual oil on the surface was gone, as this can cause the paint to separate. Now we add the zenithal highlight. This will help us see all the little nooks and crannies of the head, and since she is going to be a very pale creature, this serves as our base coat for the face too. The zenithal highlight is applied by simply airbrushing white from directly above to emulate a source of light. Just like the primer, I'm using Molotow white rather than black. I then do the same to the porcelain parts. Now we can paint the hair. Since I recently acquired some, I decided this would be a perfect opportunity to trial out the Army Painter speed paints. At first, I thought that it was a pretty effective look. However, I quickly learned that speed paints have an awful tendency to reactivate, especially when placed in contact with water. This look caused me to go for a more grungy aesthetic than I was originally planned, but I am quite satisfied with the outcome. It's just a lesson to be learned in the future. Apparently you can mix it with matte medium and that helps, but good grief. Thankfully, once a layer of varnish has been applied, they won't reactivate anymore. To avoid any further complications, I switch back to a regular black acrylic paint to paint in the eyes. And while it's still on our palette, we may as well paint in her black lips too. Later, we will be applying a gloss nail polish varnish to the eyes, and then just a regular gloss acrylic varnish to the lips to differentiate the surface. Before we move forward, I airbrush a very diluted layer of green acrylic ink from below to colour the shadows of the face. The same thing to the arms and legs too, and once it's all dried, I airbrush a few layers of Pledge floor polish as a varnish, and this will seal in all the paint we've applied. Especially important considering the reactivating properties of the paint we use for the hair. And then once that's dried, we mix a little matte Mod Podge into the floor polish mixture and just apply a few layers of that. Now that the surface has been all successfully mattified, we can start adding the chalk pastels. To do this, we just grind up some pastels onto some sandpaper, rub a brush over them and use it as a palette. In this application, I'm essentially using the chalk pastels as you would eyeshadow. On top of the emulated makeup application, I'm also applying the pastels around some of the recesses, but not going too harsh as to mud up the features or make them seem too defined. Now we just repeat the varnishing stage to lock in the pastels. To give some life to those eyes, I'm applying some UV gloss nail polish to them, then we'll chuck the head in the UV chamber and cure it. As a finishing touch, I'm just applying some glossy acrylic varnish to the lips. This should make them glossy, but still nowhere near as glossy as the eyes. Now, before we reassemble the doll, I'm going to grunge up all of its clothing so that it matches the aesthetic of the face perfectly. To do this, I'm airbrushing very diluted acrylic ink through, well, the airbrush. I mainly start by spraying from below to create some shadows, and then I give a more overall pass, just to really dirty it up whilst not making it too splotchy. And after a touch of Frankensteining the girl back together, well, let's take a look at the final doll. Hope you enjoyed the video, guys. This doll is actually still available on my store, linked in the description, so please feel free to check that out if you like. But for now, see you in the next one. See ya!